to our beginning beekeeping class today. I'm Lynn. I'm glad you're here.
Hi, how are you?
Have you, audience here, raised bees at all, or is this you're just learning and wanting to know how to get started?
Raised bees. I've been intrigued by the whole bee declination population thing. I think they're exceedingly important, and so I'm intrigued at the possibility of it. But I'm also one of those guys that has a lot of hobby stuff, so I thought, no, this might be a great. And I know nothing about it, so I thought this might be a great kind of a beginner thing to just either pique my interest more or go from there.
Yes, sounds good. Pretty much same thing. Gathering information. Yeah. We hear a lot in the news anymore about the declining bee population, and one of the reasons that I handed out a list of flowers, trees, shrubs that bees like is that this is a level that people often like to get started on. Maybe they don't even want to keep bees, they realize, but they could at least be planting some things that are beneficial to the bees. And even if, and then if you do have bees, you definitely are becoming more aware of what the bees like. One, talking about the bee population declining, I'll pass this around. The picture on the right shows what you would expect a grocery store and what grocery stores do have in their produce section. The picture on the right then shows what it would look like if we didn't have bees or any kind of pollinators. Bees are one of our main pollinators. They aren't our only pollinators, but they do a tremendous amount. So about a third of our food supply requires pollination. So we would be a little shocked to walk into a grocery store and just see what was there without the effect of pollination. So that's pretty amazing, isn't it?
Now, Lynn, are you raising bees yourself?
I am.
Okay,
Yes.
because I know you're the garden gal here, and I've talked to you about gardening stuff over the past. So
Yes.
So you're actually doing this, and then do you notice? Does it also help attract hummingbirds, or does hummingbirds help with pollination a little bit, right? But not to the extent bees do.
Yeah.
Right. And
Okay.
so I find that since I've had bees, I must be going on my 6th year now of having bees, I'm planting more things that are bee or pollinator friendly, and so yes, I do have more hummingbirds because
because you put those in.
yes, yeah. So that the things that attract one often attract the other. Things that are nectar rich and have, and for the bees, they need the pollen as well as nectar.
And do you notice a difference in your gardening and your landscaping, both before and after you started your beekeeping?
Yes, you have a lot more productivity in your fruits or vegetables. You know, if you thought you didn't have enough zucchini before, you'll definitely have zucchini now.
Okay.
And I like to encourage people too to consider beekeeping. Occasionally there's someone that doesn't like honey or doesn't think they need a lot of honey, but they're an avid gardener. I encourage them to keep bees both so that we can be supporting our bee population, but also just for that added benefit of having sure pollination. Because with the bee population declining, that's becoming a thing that they're, another way to see that effect is that when it's really rainy and or windy, the bees don't fly. And so in a spring, when it's like that, the home orchard or someone that isn't bringing in a whole lot of bees to pollinate, well, even at that, they just don't want to fly when it's windy and wet. And you can just see a decrease in productivity on the apple or again, on the zucchini or whatever else, tomatoes. So in considering putting a hive, and you can do it in town, I was talking with Andy about that earlier, it's not a problem to have it in a town, even in a small yard. You just want to consider some things, and one is where you're going to locate the hive. You want to keep the flight path clear. Let's just look at our box here for a minute. I'll unpack this in a little bit. But the way this hive sits, there's an opening right here, and so that's their front door. You both want to orientate that towards the east if you can, so that the morning sun can start warming up the hive as soon as possible, because the morning sun wakes the bees up and gets them going just like it would us. You don't have to have that, but it is just a nice thing to do so that they can get warmed up in the morning and get going. But then that's also their flight path, and so you wouldn't want to orient their flight path right so that you're having to cross it to go in your front or back door, or where the neighbor kids are going to cross, or that kind of thing. So just think a little bit about that. When you're working around the hive, you also want to be aware of that some, that you don't want to necessarily be walking back and forth in front of there. If you have your protective clothing on, it's not going to matter a whole lot, but that just, they're going to be that mainstream of where they're coming and going. Otherwise, there's always some just hanging around the hive and sitting there, and they don't care so much, but they kind of don't like you getting in their path. And the bees do like full sun all day long. You don't have to try to shade them, even in our sunny area. If you want to sit them someplace so they have a little bit of a natural windbreak, you can, or plant a bush or something eventually to give them a little break from the wind, that's fine. But like I had said, they're basically just not going to fly if it's really windy.
So even 110-degree days, it's not really a big deal for them?
Nope, it isn't. No.
I'll be darned. Forget about yourself. I haven't been caught yet. You know if you do.
So, yeah, so look first, before you put the beehive up, consider where you want it.
What's going on?
Bees also need a source of water, so if there isn't something close by, you can provide a bird bath or just some kind of dish. And it's good to have some pebbles or something like that in there so they can sit on that. Bees don't like to, or won't just land on a surface of water. They want to sit on something and then sip the water. And so that's to keep your neighbors happy. If you don't have a source of water, and the only source of water is the neighbor's kiddie pool or the neighbor's dog dish, you might have neighbors that aren't that happy, but that's something that you can easily remedy. And if you're going to, again, we're talking about the flight path a little bit ago, keep that in mind a little bit too. If you're going to be weed eating or mowing around there, you can do it in the evening or early morning, mow, weed eat, and stuff like that when there's less activity, or just make sure you're wearing some protective clothing. It doesn't seem to bother them too much to come fairly close with mowing or weed eating, but to come right up to their hive might get them just a little bit riled up.
What kind of perimeter, like 10 feet, 15 feet?
I suppose 10-ish. Yeah, and I have weed eated right up to them on an early morning before I came to work, just because I wanted to, and the bees weren't real active, and it was fine. You just kind of get to know the bees a little bit. That's one of the things I never expected to happen, is to actually enjoy the bees as much as I do. I wanted them for the pollination, I wanted the honey, but I didn't really think about that they would be enjoyable. So this kit is a nice way to get started. You get tools and the basic brood box or bottom box. I'll take this all apart here so we can see all that's in here. You can also buy all the components separately. We'll talk about some of these extra pieces as we go along. But you get a number of tools, plus just the basic setup here. You can paint your hive pieces. Use a low VOC paint, which most paints are anymore. And don't paint the inside, just paint the outside.
Just to weatherproof it a little bit?
Weatherproof it a little bit, make it look attractive to you.
Yeah.
It's up to you whether you do that or not.
Customer assistant, communicate please. Customer assistant, communicate.
Got things moved out over here. Let's get this lid out of here, and I think that we can lift that out. You want to try to lift this out?
Yeah.
Okay, sir? Okay. Reach down and get that much, and then I'll get the bottom part that's here. Okay, I'm sitting it this long way. Switch it around. There you go. Yeah, like that. Okay. Okay. So you you always have an outer and inner lid. Different setups can look a little bit different. This is the outer lid here. It has a metal top, so it's nice weatherproofing. Also some insulation. It's going to have an inner lid. One of the advantages of this, and they're most often made with this hole in it, is that you can do winter feeding on top of here. You can put a solid candy board, as they're called, or something like that. Or there's even devices for, in the spring, when you're feeding the liquid food, which we'll talk about some more. And it could sit on here and the bees can come up and get it. And it's just an extra layer of protection there. Okay, so do we have, is this our... Okay. So now this is called the landing board or landing pad. This is where they're going to land to come in to the hive. And then there's usually some kind of a device like this, an excluder it's called. And so you can have just a small little hole for them to come in, which might be a beginning stage, or if it's cold outside. Or you can have a little more wide open. And I seem to lose the get in there. You could have it more wide open and have a wider space for them to come in. You want to join our beekeeping class? All right, just watching. Thank you. Yeah, basic, either the basic deep box or the super that goes on top will have 10 frames in it. That's just standard. And the frames are made with a little spacer there so that there's the perfectly right space between them. It's called the bee space, and that's the space that the bees like to be able to go up and down. The bees are going to be all up and down in and around here with the queen, taking care of her, feeding her, doing all the stuff that they do. I'll pass that around, let you handle that a little bit. This is a common type of frame. It's a plastic divider with a little bit of beeswax put on there in this perfect geometric pattern that looks very, very fake and machine made. The interesting thing is the bees will do this pattern no matter what. Some people build what's called a top bar hive, and it would only just have this part on there, and the bees can just make the comb freeform. It's still going to have this beautiful geometric cell.
They do that every time on their own.
They do. When they build just freeform and don't build on something like this, it still looks so geometric and so perfect. It's just amazing. You're like, what? They got some kind of machine in there making the comb. No, it's just how they were created, and they're just an amazing creature.
Everyone, please, can have your question.
A video on YouTube showing a bee making its own hive. They did it with like it said 3 days, and it was just making a little hexagon as it went down. So then an outer shell and an inner shell with a little bit of honeycomb.
Yeah, it's just amazing. It does not take them a long time at all. Now this setup sits on a screened bottom board. You can have solid bottom boards. This can be really nice for our area because it's cooler for the bees. In the winter you would want it to be solid. This serves as a solid piece. Mine has the actual board that goes on it. This also can have, you could put a sticky paper on here. The purpose of this is because of the varroa mite that's a problem anymore. A little mite that gets on the bees and can cause a problem. And it's a newer problem that's come up, and everyone doesn't really know exactly what to do with it, how to keep the bees healthy, because it will suck their blood out and insert some viruses at the same time, and it can cause, they think it's a good chunk of the cause of the colony collapse disorder.
So the insect gets an insect that attacks it?
The insect gets an insect, yes. Yeah. But the mites the bees would walk around on here, the mites would fall through. So whether you had this piece in here or not, if you had some sticky paper on here, you would be able to pull this out and monitor, oh, there's 2 per square inch, or there's 1 per whatever, and know whether you wanted to treat. There is finally a natural treatment out that's made out of hops, so you can put some hop extracts, drips in the hive during the active bee time.
So is there a hair making class this afternoon so we can do the hot thing?
You know, honey makes mead, so it might be more appropriate to have a mead making class. And I've got the person to bring in to do it.
Let's figure, we're gonna have pots.
I know.
Do double duty.
I know someone doing microbrewery.
Yes. Put this back.
So fresh hops or spent hops or?
This is like, it's, the strips, the strip looks about like this length, it looks like to me, and they're made to drape over, some of the frames, and it looks kind of like tobacco juice, it looks like kind of dark and sticky, and it's apparently being really effective. Previously, the only thing you could do was put a chemically infused strip in here. And then you really had to do it when you weren't collecting the honey, and you had like remove the queen for some different processes to help get rid of the mites, and it's been kind of a mess to take care of. Now, saying all that, I don't know that I've had much problem with mites, and I think that the home beekeeper is not going to have as much problem as the commercial beekeepers do. My personal opinion is that as much as we need the commercial beekeepers to be pollinating our crops, or we wouldn't have almonds or everything on up. And the bees are, I would imagine, all right now down in California pollinating the almonds because they're the first crop to come out. And then they'll get fed a bunch of sugar water and trucked to the next place. Fed some more sugar water in between and trucked to the next place. And that's kind of a hard life. Think how tired and worn out and crabby you get when you've been on a long car trip, and so bees are getting trucked all around, and I think it's, like wearing down their immune system. Another reason I am wanting to promote home beekeeping is because I think we can provide a lot nicer, gentler, healthier environment for the bees and help support the population. Okay, I should have left this off. When you get your bees, you're going to want to feed them in the beginning, and so it's very easy just to take one of these frames out and put this device in there. This is a feeder. It's not all the way put together. This goes down in here. I'm not going to try to mess with it all right now. But this would go down in here so the bees can climb down in and get into the sugar syrup. So this would go in here, we pour sugar syrup in here, and they can come in and feed. In the beginning, you're going to be closing them in for a few days. But also in the beginning, the bees will come towards the end of April, and we may or may not have abundant flowers for them to feed on. So it's a way to get them up and going easy in the beginning, and then in the fall you do the same thing, feed a little extra, and in the winter you can do a solid candy. More bees die, or the hive disappears and dies in the winter from moisture than from cold. They're able to regulate the temperature. Someone had said earlier something about how hot our temperatures can be. If it's hot, a number of the worker bees spend their whole day fanning their little wings and creating air conditioning, and they're very effective at it.
Huh.
In the winter, I don't understand all what they can do to keep it warm other than their body warm, but they huddle together and do some things and also keep the temperature up. They move to the top of the hive, which is why a candy board works up on a top lid, because the bees are more up on the top of the hive because hot air rises.
But that water source is the important thing, is what you were saying, right? That they have a continuous water source.
Yes.
Even in the winter time, because isn't that what?
I would imagine that they would still need it in the winter. I don't know that I see, they don't come out of the hive a lot, but on a warmer day they could. And so if you have a water source, you could do that. That might be something to look into further.
But in the winter time, they kind of just tend to stick close to there and aren't really out looking for anything.
No.
Okay.
And you don't really open it up and look at it much in the winter either, just to not chill them. But there's sometimes you do need to. Okay, some other basic equipment that comes with this: some gloves, some leather gloves. You can use your own. These are nice and long, so it's nice whatever glove you have for it to come up over your sleeve. And then you can either do something like this beekeeper's jacket, or you can get a whole outfit too. This one comes with head covering. You do at least want head covering, that's the very minimum. This is a nice hat with netting. The hat fits on your head, and then it comes down. your arms go into some elastic heart on there, and so you have some nice screening like this. It's not right in your face. I'm a little claustrophobic, and it doesn't bother me to wear that. It makes it nice to be able to work with the bees and not have to be afraid they're going to sting you. The other thing I do if I'm not wearing a full suit is pull my socks up over my pant legs. Now, occasionally in the middle of summer, pants and socks and gloves and everything is a little warm, but you do want to be protected. You want to, at the very least, you want to have your face protected. Some people don't cover their hands, and you'll get stung a time or two. I know this to be true. And if you do get stung, you don't want to smash that bee and start flailing around, because as soon as you do, you release some. Want to join our bee class?
No, it's interesting. I do have a couple hives myself.
Sweet.
That's cool.
Yes. You smash that bee, he releases pheromones, and it, help him in trouble, everybody come rescue. And then especially if you're just thrashing around acting more like a bear than a human, you'll have a lot of visitors. So you just want to keep yourself calm, maybe remove yourself a little bit till you can get yourself calmed down a little bit, because that's just a little startling to get bit. It doesn't hurt real bad, I don't think. But I would also recommend keeping Benadryl around just so that you would have that if you needed it, or if someone was visiting and got bit, yes. And then of course if someone has, you or someone else having a severe reaction, yes, yeah. This kit also comes with Beekeeping for Dummies. A lot of great information in there. Not that any of us are dummies, but we need beginning stuff a lot of times. And I think that's the book we sell separately. Two other tools that are very important that come with this kit. Bees need nectar. We know that. We don't often think about them needing pollen, but they do. Baby bees need pollen. That's another thing you can feed spring or fall is a pollen patty. It just would go up on that top there too, just a chunk of it, so they have a little something extra to eat if there's not plenty of stuff available. But the third thing that bees need is sticky substances like, my mind keeps going blank on this. You know how some trees have those sticky sort of buds on them, or they have sap or any kind of thing like that? Bees need that too, a supply of that. And they'll forage up to 2 miles to get what they need. But some people plant some of specific trees and shrubs, not for their flowers, but for the sap or resins. And so the bees make what's called propolis, and they glue things down. So if you go to go check on the bees, and you're most likely not going to be able just to pull this up. They've glued the corners down. And so you need this hive tool, or something out of your toolbox that looks similar, so you come do a little pry and pop it off of there, so then you can pick this up and check things out when you're checking things out. So, one of these is good, 2 or 3, if you keep forgetting where you put them, and then you'll have 3 of them hanging on the hook eventually. And this is another essential tool. It's a smoker, has bellows here. You can use wood pellets or dry grass. This one comes with some burlap. Used to be what people used all the time, but burlap used to be a common thing that everything came home in, the potatoes and that kind of stuff. But it doesn't really matter. It's something that's going to burn. You get it burning down in there, close the lid, and then you get a smoke. So if you were going to come, we'll pretend like this is the main lid here. It's nice to have 2 people. You can do it by yourself. But it's a little nice to have 2 people who can come check on the hive for some reason. You would get this smoke going and start puffing a little smoke here. And then as you or the other person gets this lid lifted up, you start puffing a little smoke in here. And it gets the bees calmed down.
So is there a time of day? I mean, is the evening better, or is it like when the sun's out and they've all gone to do their thing for the day?
A couple of those options work good. Morning and evening, they're calmer and more in the hive, but in the middle of the day, when it's warm, it can be a really good time to check them, partly because a lot of them are out foraging, but also because it's warm. If it would be a chilly morning or chilly evening, you wouldn't want to be messing in here real long, because you're, cooling their whole house down.
Okay, oh, okay.
But it will work with whatever time that you want to get in there and check on them.
I just didn't know if there was a better time when they were, I don't know, less irritable or more irritable, or...
Morning and evening, they're going to be calmer, seemingly.
Okay.
Middle of the day, there's going to be less of them. So they think that the smoking works to calm them down because they're getting the message that the forest is on fire, their home's in danger. So they'll gorge themselves on honey immediately when they start smelling the smoke, and then they feel like you do after a big Thanksgiving dinner. They just want to go lay down and take a nap. And so that it quiets them down quite quickly. Maybe it's just the whole suggestion thing, because it doesn't seem to me like they have, even though that's how that's always stated, whether they have time to actually go eat something or not, I don't know, but I know that it does work, it does calm them down. And then if you're in there messing around and they're kind of getting a little riled up again, then you can just get a little more smoke in there, or just not worry about it. So there's always a nice hum to the beehive. It's fun to just walk by without even, going right up and opening up and checking on. There's always just a hum of activity, but it gets a little more like an angry hum, louder when you start messing with them, because they do want to protect their home and their food supplies. So if you were needing to check a frame to see if the queen has laid eggs, or you're going to harvest a frame, this brush is just wonderful because you can gently brush the bees off, because the bees, this is where they live and play. There are going to be a whole bunch of them on here. That's, I think, the part that surprised me, is that for some reason I guess I thought you pulled a frame out and the bees are all someplace else. No, there's a whole bunch of bees all around here. And so just a gentle brush and you can get most of the bees off. You'll never get all the bees off, and occasionally you make a bee a little sticky. That's fine, somebody else will clean them up. And then you can do what you need to with this. So again, another essential piece. And these are real easy. This is going to usually end up a little sticky after you use it. It doesn't take much to rinse it off, hang it up to dry, be ready for next time.
What if, is there any harm in like never harvesting the honey? I mean, you just want them there to pollinate your flowers and stuff, and you're really not interested in pursuing the honey? I mean, at some point you have to toss out the old combs, I guess, or give them to friends who are more interested in it, or?
The only thing that you would want to watch for is that you start with this box, the blue box or the deep box. When this is 70% full, or 7 out of the 10 frames, you would want to put the next set on the medium super.
You want to give them another place to keep depositing, or else you're going to create another issue.
They could swarm. It's one of the reasons they swarm. You don't want them to feel like they have too much room. If they had 2 frames filled up with honey and pollen and larvae and everything, they had 2 frames filled up, and you put another one on, they might leave because that's too much room rattling around. When you're going to go put the medium super on, you would want to put a queen excluder. Sometimes these are metal, this one's plastic, it doesn't really matter. The queen's bigger than the workers, and so it doesn't look like the worker bees can get through there to me, but they do, and the queen doesn't. So if you would harvest out of this bottom one, which you could at the end of the year, or if you weren't going to put a medium super on, you could, and you want to kind of just keep the bees from getting too crowded, you could harvest any time of the year a couple of these frames, and but you're going to have a mixture of things on this board. Down here where the queen is, you'll have larvae, half-hatched bees and stuff like that in there that you're going to have to kind of work around. You're going to strain it anyway, so that can be okay. But if you're doing this and then putting the super on, these frames are going to not have larvae in it at all, or any kind of eggs in any kind of. So, and you've all seen beehives out in the fields, orchards, whatever. And
they're very big stack.
And some people do. So this is what, and in the winter, this is what you're going to leave too, is this, mostly full. Not all the way full, because you want to pull a frame or 2 from here, clean it off, put it back in, have it empty. But some people do 2 deeps to leave them for the winter, and then harvest them. So far, we've not ever got past having to put 2 supers on, and sometimes we only do 1.
And that's in 6 years.
Well, that's been, I'm not saying that all those bees have survived all these winters and you're kind of starting over. Your first season you're going to have less because they're getting this bottom filled up that you're leaving. In subsequent years, you can have a higher harvest off of that.
Do they work 1 frame at a time? Or will they work them all concurrently?
The queen starts at some point, if you had this like this, so their entrance was over here, she's gonna start over here laying eggs, and then honey and pollen gets builded in some of those cells too. And then as those larvae are developing, she'll move to the next frame, and then keep going and keep going. And so if you're ever gonna find the queen, which I still find a little hard, she's where all the activity is. The worker bees are all hovering around her as she's laying eggs, because that's all she does is lay eggs all day long, all her life. Then at some point, these cells do hatch out. The worker bees will clean them out, and she goes back there and starts over. And so it takes a little bit of seeing what's going on in there. It's not a real clear, they only do this way. There seems to be, in fact, I have a picture to show you of what a frame might look like in this bottom box.
And everything you just described, so this is kind of the factory.
Yes.
This is where they're making new bees, this is where everything's really happening. But as it gets full, when you put that medium super on there, then that's typically going to be more honey and less eggs and less.
It will have no eggs because the queen's not up there, but you still
Right.
could have some pollen cells, which are not a problem at all. They just end up looking a little more orange, and they go in and harvest some of that back out. But when you go to strain your honey, that's not a problem. Having the larva in there isn't a problem either. It's just not very pleasant that you're disrupting some larva and straining that out when,
Right.
when you're, yeah.
Well, especially if you're trying to encourage more bee growth.
Right.
Right.
So it just makes so much sense for me to put that queen excluder on there. A lot of people skip that step, and I just think that's a really important step to
Okay.
have on there.
And so at some point that could become your primary honey harvesting frames there,
Yes.
and this is just continue to be your bee factory.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then in the winter, you would harvest all of this, then go back down to this, or your two bottoms, if that's what you're doing.
Okay.
Yeah. So it makes a really nice pattern there.
So a good goal would be to get to the point where you're not really harvesting any honey out of there. You're just keeping the factory fed
Yes.
and happy and productive.
Except that if you're going to skinny it all the way down to that bottom box, which you probably would in the winter, you would still harvest a couple of
Right.
frames.
Just to give them
Yeah.
room and a place.
Yes.
And to keep the factory pumping out.
And so let's just talk about harvesting some of the honey, because that is a real important reason to have bees, is because you have your own delicious honey. And I think most people know that if you have allergies, it's always encouraged to eat local honey, because you're getting just little bits of the local pollen theirs that can help reduce your sensitivity to some of those things. But even better than just local honey would be your very, very local backyard pollen that you could be using to keep yourself healthy. So you can, if you were harvesting these frames, one of the reasons for the supers being shorter is that this whole box can be awfully heavy when you have full frames of honey. And so if you're having to move the whole thing to be able to get in and like check on the queen, you don't want to have to be lifting, at least most of us, some of you strong men would be just fine with that, but it just makes it a lot easier. So let's say I'm going to harvest this. I've brushed my bees off, maybe took it over to a table or took it inside. I'm going to work with it. There's hot, heated knives that could cut the top off all the surface. And you can put it in an extractor. There's also just a regular knife that's made for that. It doesn't heat up, and it would do the same thing. Number of methods like that. For the size operation I have, I use a sieve like this. It's a very fine sieve, and also you can get a honey bag, honey filter. So I'll have more than one container going when I'm doing the honey, and I might take a colander then, sit this on in a bowl, put this filter, line the colander with that, and then the fun begins. I'll get like a pancake spatula and just put it in here and just scrape chunks of the honey and honeycomb off, put it in a bowl. And when I've got all of that done, then I get in there with my hands and, I've got this is my sieve sitting on my bowl here. Squish a nice handful of that honey and honeycomb and put it in. So I'm breaking up those cells a little bit to release the honey. And it's very therapeutic, it's very fun to squish all of that, I enjoy it. And then once you put it in the sieve or using the honey filter, usually the time of year that we would harvest, anytime in the summer or even our falls, our houses are so warm, you don't have to do anything else other than let it sit there and let gravity do its work. If you harvested late or if your house is warm, I often just turn the light on in my oven and set my bowl and the sieve in there, and that's just enough extra warmth that within a day or two, the honey's all drained through and you've got beautiful golden clear honey.
When you're squishing your honeycombs and you're being therapeutic with yourself, how do you do that with gloves on, or do you? And
I
how
often
do you
do
get that
latex,
off of
yeah.
your-
I often do latex gloves because it is a bit of a mess, though. If you want to be really hands-on, you've got not one licking to do when you're done and clean your hands off.
So there's no real magical way to clean your stuff.
I suppose, I've never tried this, I often will put a cooking spray on like a measuring cup, if it's gonna be something hard to get out. I guess you could cooking spray your hands or even your gloves. The latex gloves do come clean easier than your hands do, so it's pretty easy just to squeeze everything off and feel like you're not wasting anything.
And is there anything else you have to do to the honey to process it, or is it good to go?
It's
once
good to
you-
go.
Really? You don't have to pasteurize it, or?
In fact, you don't want
You
to.
don't want to, because, okay.
That's where
That's the only food that doesn't rot.
it is. As long as it was the capped honey. Depending on what's been going on the frame, this could be a frame that's been done for a while and all the honey is capped. It has, it's capped. It's not hanging open anymore. But if some various stages of process were going on, you might have some of these cells that are still open, and you can see a liquid in there. That's just called nectar at that stage. When the bees put the nectar in there, fan it with their wings for I don't know how long until it reduces down the water content in there until it becomes the honey.
Oh, wow.
So at the nectar stage, it can spoil. So if I'm harvesting a frame just because I need to and it has some nectar, I'll go through first and scrape some of that off and put it in a different bowl, strain it and use it first, or put it in the freezer. Freezing is actually a good way to store any of the honey. Honey can sugar at some point from just sitting or crystallize, yes. And they make whipped honey on purpose using a certain process that makes a really fine crystal, and a lot of people like that. It's creamy and a little thicker. But honey stores very well in the freezer. That doesn't crystallize.
I didn't know that.
No.
Oh,
So I always do that
fascinating.
some now. And it doesn't hurt it at all to crystallize. You can just set the jar in a pan of warm water, maybe change the water out when it gets cold, and it will re-liquefy it at some point.
So roughly a comb that size or a frame that size, how much honey would you expect to roughly, like what size of jar or cup or?
That's a little hard to judge. I would maybe a pint, maybe 2 cups off of this if it was nice
Okay.
and full and heavy. That's a bit of a guess, but that might be because if you were harvesting a couple frames from here and a whole super, you would get a good gallon and a half. Just guessing.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Oh.
So you can get a decent amount of honey.
And obviously a lot of that has to do with water and the health of your hive and
Yes.
activity
Yeah.
and when your bees are lazier.
Yeah.
Question, we have those really stinky flowers along the front of our yard. Would that, like if the bees pollinated those flowers and took the pollen back to the hive, would it flavor the honey at all? They smell like death. They smell like Walking Dead, literally.
Oh.
Those flowers attract, that's the voodoo lily, right?
Yes.
It attracts flies for its pollination. I'm guessing it would not attract the bees. Just like yellow jackets can be a problem with getting into the hives. One of the jobs of the worker bees, one of the work jobs of the bees is to have guard bees that sit in the, they'll sit on the corner of whatever space we have here and guard against the yellow jackets. A weaker hive isn't able to defend as well, but a strong hive can pretty much always get rid of the yellow jackets. But a good thing to do is just get some yellow jacket traps out as early as you can and let the yellow jackets go into the traps and then not be a problem to the bees. I did some research last year just to be sure, and bees are not attracted to the yellow jacket trap. The yellow jacket traps often use, people, if they make their own, those use some meat and let it rot, or that must be the smell of what the attractant they use in them. So the voodoo lily, with its smelling like rotten meat, it attracts flies and not bees.
So the place I'm kind of considering putting a hive, if I do this, to me it's perfect. It's on the east side of my house. The property right next to me is the old reservoir property there on 14th Street, and so it's just a fence and a bunch of acreage. And it's where the Parks and Rec does their vehicle maintenance and stuff, except I'm on the upper side, so it's just woods, essentially, and brush and everything. There's no traffic in that area, with the exception of there's an animal trail that comes right by there, and so it's this traffic, this highway for skunks and deer and all the other critters and raccoons that like to go through that trail. So does this kind of prevent them from, or would this prevent some of the animals from using that trail, or are the animals just pretty much going to ignore it? And then my other question is, it would be right next to an apricot tree, and that apricot tree is really old, and it's not producing anywhere near what it should be or how it should be these days. And there hasn't been a lot of incentive to kind of resuscitate the apricot tree, because I'm the only one in the family that likes apricots. Although I have my friends in the past, they've liked getting apricots from there, but we do want to try to have some fruit trees. And would this help resuscitate the apricot tree, or?
It could be part of a process.
Okay.
You could also come to my fruit tree spraying class and learn some things on.
I think I need a pruning class is what I need, because you're a master gardener, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Pruning is probably what I need help with.
Yes, and that's something that I could talk you through, and that might be something we should do a class on at some point too.
Maybe I should take some pictures of it and come down here.
Yes.
And you can maybe talk me through some of the pruning stuff, because I think that's part of the problem, is I think there's been a pruning issue.
Yes. So some pruning, some fertilizing, and some pollination. They should all make a difference. And I don't know that the bees will have an effect on the
other wildlife.
On the other wildlife.
Okay.
That's a guess. I don't know that for sure.
Okay.
Would it attract bears?
It should not. Not anymore.
So I have a chain link fence right there, so if I see a bear with a welding torch or plasma cutter,
right,
I'm after the hive. Bolt cutters for the block there.
So let's really talk bees now. For one thing, I have a form that we'll set up at the register, and we have people sign up this time of year for the bees and prepay. I've not been able to verify my price from last year, but it should be close to $140 for a 3-pound package of bees. I'll explain that. That's 10,000 bees and the mated Italian queen. That's how they come. And so we just have you prepay so that we aren't sitting with some, extra bees that they're a little hard to store. They need to get picked up. We also ask for any and all forms of ways of getting a hold of you, regular phone, cell phone, email, anything, so that when we get the 2 or 3 days advance notice that the bees are coming, we can be sure to get a hold of you and say, come as soon as the store opens on Tuesday morning. They come at night, we store them outside, and then you come get them when it's still cool and get them home and put them in. So
you said one Italian queen, or at least one Italian?
One mated Italian queen, so she's all ready to produce eggs, and Italians are a nice, gentle bee, so they will be in this cage like this. This can here is sugar syrup. They travel just like this. There'll always be a few straggler bees around. They don't seem to bother anything. When bees have swarmed or they're in a state like this, they are so focused on the queen, you don't have to worry about them being interested in you. And when you're putting them into the hive, they're the same thing. It's not a time. It doesn't hurt to glove up and get some head protection to put them into the hive, but they're just really intently focused on the queen. So let me get this can out. So when you've gotten them home, and hopefully you can get them right home or make arrangements with someone to come do this for you, you're going to open your hive up a little bit, get a couple frames out of there. And this is the can of sugar syrup. You would just get this out of here. I had problems with this earlier. And there's like some bark or something in there to kind of help hold some of the sugar syrup. The bees have been flying in and out, they're getting syrup so they can feed the queen. So here's the queen. This little metal piece right here holds the cage. The queen is in here.
Oh, she has her little phone
Yes.
chalet, huh?
And it's gonna have a cork in the bottom, just leave that. And you're gonna come hang this. That's the first thing that you're going to do. So you're going to pick a frame, and this is made to bend, but it's nice to put a little tack on here too, just to make sure that this stays.
Okay.
It's actually probably best to hang her sideways. Do not face her, don't face her into the frame because the workers can't come feed her.
They're looking for her.
Yes, and she'll be dead. Somebody made that mistake last year. So sideways, I would say sideways. This way, you're still gonna have another frame right there. So hang it in there so she hangs sideways. Okay, so she's there. And then these bees have been kind of milling around a little bit. You can have a sugar syrup solution. The queen's still hanging there really, she's thing. You can have a sugar syrup solution mixed up in a spray bottle, because that can be helpful for this process instead of smoke. The smoke would work too, just to spray on the bees if they're getting especially riled up. Otherwise, you're going to now take this 10,000 bees, more or less, and start shaking it down over top of the queen. You can tap this some, bang on it some, and you're going to get most of them in here. It's maybe take some pictures too. That's pretty fascinating to see this whole big cloud of bees going into here.
Is there any reason not to pull out more frames and just set that in there?
Some people do that, but then you're going to have to go back and mess with that, and it's really not difficult. All the professional beekeepers do it this way. Doesn't hurt them to bang on that a little bit and get them in here. Doesn't make them any more or less riled up. But you can and should just set this and this on the ground beside it, because you will not get all the bees in here. Don't even worry about getting all the bees in. The last few stragglers